all probably agree that cryptocurrencies have done pretty well here and that they're here to stay. But as we move beyond cryptocurrencies to more social applications, I think Zooko, as he led the way with Zcash, is going to be leading the way, leading the charge, and talking about social income here today. So let's welcome Zooko Wilcox.
Hello, can you all hear me? Okay, I have a request. Will you please move to the front? Because, for one thing, I'll feel better. I'll feel less lonely up here. But the other thing is, now if people start interrupting me and asking questions and shouting out stuff, you'll all be able to hear and respond if you're all up here. All right, so my name is Zooko, and I've never given this talk before on this topic. So I'm kind of nervous. And I'm going to go for, is there a clock? Yeah, okay. I'm going to go for about 30-ish minutes and then maybe open it up for questions. Okay. So here's the thing. My background, like Will mentioned, is, I've done various different kinds of technology and science and entrepreneurship. Most recently, this cryptocurrency called Zcash, which is like Bitcoin and Ethereum, a decentralized cryptocurrency. And I liked what Will said about how, okay, so Bitcoin and Ethereum and Zcash have demonstrated decentralized teleportable gold, but is there something that's like post-money, that's a new kind of economics? Well, I don't know. I haven't figured that out, but this is a stab in that direction. And the way I got started was I was thinking, well, I really like the idea of basic income. I just love that idea. That's awesome. And, but I really hate the idea of centralized anythings because I figure the thing is going to become corrupt and undermine or become counterproductive to the whole goal of it. Or it's going to be so difficult and expensive to keep it from becoming corrupt that it's going to undermine the whole goal of it. So I wanted to figure out how to invent decentralized basic income. And so I was just thinking about that for a long time. And the answer is no, I couldn't actually figure it out. But here's where I started thinking. We have cryptocurrencies now. They're fully decentralized. And every human can have a wallet that's local to them. It's a software agent that serves them and does things for them. And so I thought, what if everyone, so if you want to have a decentralized basic income, an approximation of that is, what if everyone's wallet donates some of their money, like 10% of their income or something like that, and it donates it just to recipients who've been selected in some way by the owner of that wallet. So it's fully decentralized in the action of it, and it's fully decentralized in the choice of who the recipients are. And just in general, if there's a whole community or a whole planet or whatever, and everyone's wallet was doing that repeatedly, then that would sort of spread the wealth without any centralized sort of aggregation and redistribution of the wealth. So my hard and fast rules for exploring this part of the technological design space were, let's see, what we can do without any delegation to a larger third party. And what we can do that's fully opt-in, it's fully consensual and voluntary for every participant. Obviously, I told you why I think decentralization is really important for this experiment. And the other thing, there's something that's kind of cool about it, as an economist told me yesterday, a lot of markets or movements require critical mass before they work, right? A lot of different kinds of markets have that requirement. And kind of a cool thing about this idea is it could actually do something interesting even if you were the only person using it. So, which is, we have these new tools today that we didn't have 10 or 100 years ago, computers. And so there's a thing that people do a lot of, like most or a lot of people do a lot of, which is donating to charities. Well, you could, if your crypto wallet or whatever kind of economic tool you have did this for you, you could automate and ease that process of donating to charities. And if you were the only person who did that, it would still have the effect of you donating. But in addition to automation, we also have this new opportunity for new social norms, new, I don't know, organizations or disorganizations or whatever. So, wow, I'm going to have so much time left for questions. I hope you're thinking of questions. Because this is a very simple idea, and I don't have a whole lot to say about it. I do have a whole lot to say about it, but it's a very simple idea, which is just, let's all start automatically donating to random people, either friends or charities. Wait a minute, I'm almost done. We've already got one question queued up, which is really good. But the more I thought about it, I started thinking, there's actually a lot of different human behaviors which are kind of like this, right? Lots and lots of people donate to charities. And then there's recurring sponsorship. You know how Patreon is really much better for a producer, like an artist or a writer or whoever, than whatever alternative they had before Patreon? And for one reason, that's because it's recurring. And for another reason, that's because they get a large number of different donors instead of a single donor they're dependent on. And then, there are lots and lots of people give sort of algorithmically based on their culture, like in Christianity and Islam that I listed here, and Judaism. And that also is recurring and sort of, it's intended to be semi-deterministic, like there's a formula for it in those traditions. And then there's the idea of basic income, which hasn't been really deployed at scale in whole human cultures yet, but it's a widely appreciated idea. And then there's taxes, which is similarly an algorithmic, society-wide process. And then, does anybody know what a chama is? That's cool. That's fine. Chamas are a thing that's really widespread in East Africa, especially Kenya. And basically everyone, like half or almost all people there are participate in this economic system. It's typically only women, because one of its advantages is that it is a way to save your cash so your husband can't spend it. And it's a group of friends or like community members who know each other, and there's maybe 10 or 20 in a typical group. And it's a collective savings or collective social insurance system. So one way, people do it, and not only in East Africa, but also in the Caribbean, and they used to do it in Korea back when Korea was poor, and so on. Often these people don't have financial services like banks. And you can think of it as savings because one way, there's different rules for different chamas or micro savings clubs. One way is that just every month, everyone in the club gives some money to the next person. It's their turn that month. So if there's 10 members, then you're giving to the other club members for 9 months, and then on the 10th month, you get 10 times as much that month. And so in that sense, it's kind of savings because you're putting in for the first 9 months and then you get it back. But in other cases, it's more based on needs. So a typical way to do it is that somebody has like a can and everyone puts their cash in the can and that person holds on to it for them. And then whoever has a funeral first, they get to pay their funeral expenses out of the can because that's very difficult expense for them. So I was interested in, when I learned about this practice, I was interested in how it's really, really widespread, but that almost everyone that I chat with about technology every day has never heard of it, and that it's totally decentralized and voluntary. And I thought how if we had computer programs that could manage our money for us in a totally decentralized way and do things for us, this is one of the things it could do. You could, if you had your phone, well, okay, so there's at least 2 or 3 ways the social income idea could be applied depending on who's the recipient of the money. So in all 3 of the ways, it's fully decentralized and voluntary and automated and computer assisted. But in one way, the recipients are all of your friends, like everyone in your address book, or all of your Facebook friends or something. And that would be kind of like a chama, and it would be kind of like that practice that if your friends got laid off and you go out for drinks, you offer to buy them drinks or whatever. It's just like friendly. And it'd be kind of like social insurance. Like if you had a better job or a more steady job, you would pay out more. And if you lost your job, you would get paid by your friends automatically. Oh, and I didn't mention this part about the technology. When I said there are these techniques that we have today, computer assistance and social norms, there's a thing that I didn't mention, which is cryptography, which is what I'm actually an expert on. That's the thing that I have most specialized in my life is cryptography. And an interesting thing about it is it might be possible to provide privacy over this behavior, over the transactions, over the flow of money in the system in a way that probably wasn't really practical before. Well, we do have privacy around donations and charities and tithing and all that stuff. It's totally standard in all of our cultures that stuff is often private. There's often social norms around what gets exposed to who. But the way that typically works is by some intermediary, like the church, protecting the privacy of the other participants, like who they receive money from or who they give money to. But with cryptography, we could have a fully decentralized system, which also included some kinds of privacy, and it would depend on what you wanted. Different kinds of privacy are implementable with cryptography. But I was reminded of this when I got to the part about how it's kind of like social insurance or helping your friends out. There's an interesting difference between normal old helping your friends out, which is with this modern technology, we could make it so that nobody knows who's among your friends is paying who else among your friends how much. Like if everyone was doing this, and I said there were 3 different ways to do it. There's paying out to like all your friends, there's paying out to selected charities or public works or something like that. And then there's paying out to all local people. It would be the 3rd way. And I'll try to get back to it. But real quick, if we're doing it in the pay out to all your friends way, then we could use cryptography so that you don't know which of your other friends are paying or getting paid how much. So you only find out the total effect on you if that makes sense. Well, the interesting thing that I like about it is maybe what if somebody loses their job and they don't want to tell their friends that, or they don't want to ask for help or whatever. Well, if everyone was already running this automated encrypted thing, they would automatically get a little trickle of money from all of their friends without their friends knowing even. That's actually technologically possible. And that's interesting to me. So that's the FriendNet version. And one thing I really like about the FriendNet version is that it's a viral marketing campaign. Because you can get a message that says, hey, 3 of your friends are doing this social income thing, and if you install social income and become part of social income, they will send you some money. But then also you will start sending them money as well. I don't know, that's an interesting possibility. If you paid out to all local people, that was or all random people. Let me try to explain clearly. This is how I got started on this idea of decentralized basic income. And to be decentralized, there's two fundamental problems. There's the problem of the reason to be decentralized is because of the first fundamental problem, which is the corruption or failure or inefficiency of the centralized operator. But the other fundamental problem, which is sort of technologically subtle, and I think a lot of people don't recognize it yet, is what we call the Sybil attack in computer science and cryptography. But what it boils down to is that there is no way to give money or access to a computer program or anything. There's no way to give anything equally to everyone on the planet because you can't identify them. And if you try, then you're vulnerable to someone taking advantage of this by spoofing billions of identities and getting 1 billion times more than they were supposed to. That's the fundamental problem with identity, and as you probably do know, identity is sort of the fundamental need or necessity for a lot of the novel mechanism designs from the Radical Markets book and so forth. So it's a really deep problem. And for my exploration of the design space, my solution was we're gonna not depend on a solution to that problem. We're going to assume that you can't identify all of the 10 billion other people. Just you can't. That's absolutely the case today, and I think it's a pretty good part of the design space to build something that assumes that's still the case tomorrow. And that's why one variant of this is your phone gives out money to either randomly selected people or to like every other phone that it's ever been within 10 meters of or something like that, because that is resistant to the Sybil attack. Nobody can spoof 1 billion phones having been within 10 meters of your phone in order to get 1 billion times more than their share. And that's the thing that's closest to decentralized basic income, is when you just give out to like some kind of locally selected set, and it's still global because it's transitive. So if everyone did that over time, then the wealth would continue to spread further and further, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm almost done. Everybody else think of questions after that guy's question. I've only spent like 1/3 of the time we have here, so if you don't have questions, we can all go do something else. This is just a half-baked idea I had so far. That's all it is at this point. But one thing I really like about it is that it's easy to try, it's easy to experiment with. A small group can start messing with this idea. We can get charities. There's a whole bunch of charities that accept Zcash donations. Zcash is that cryptocurrency that I'm one of the architects of. There's a whole bunch of nonprofits and charities and activist groups and things like that that accept donations in Zcash. It would be totally easy to get them to accept recurring automated donations to their charities. And then a small group of people who just want to experiment could easily set up some kind of experiment with this. And so this is what I want y'all to do. Either tell me this is a stupid idea and why, and convince me to stop thinking about it, or let's try it out and just start like taking notes. And one last detail. Over the last couple of days when I was here, I started getting an even less fully baked idea, which is that you could, y'all know about the quadratic voting concept? Okay, everyone's nodding at that one. And have you seen the liberal radicalism paper, which is a terrible name, but it's quadratic. It's quadratic donating is what it is, right? Well, just in the last day, I started realizing, if we did have this, what I call social income, automated, decentralized donations, it might be possible to layer quadratic donating, aka liberal radicalism, on top of that. That would be interesting. And so that's the third call to action, is think of different new ideas and share them with me. Okay, that's it. That's all I had prepared on my slides, so. Thanks. So what did you want to say? Should I stand here or go there? Come up there. We're here. No harm done.
All right, cool. Thanks. Hi. So I will say I do think this is like the right problem to be thinking about.
Okay.
So I'm glad you're thinking about it. My big question is like, what do we do with human greed?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question.
So like, I own a little bit of Zcash because I think it's great.
Thanks.
I'm not giving that away.
Even a little bit of it?
Like, I make a fair amount. My wife and I would make a fair amount of money every year. I give away like the minimum amount to deal with my conscience. And then the rest, I'm like, well, I have kids, they have to get educated.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose my house.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that's my first, I think that was like that's why I raised my hand so early.
Yeah.
This system has to deal with my greed.
I think that's a good problem to be focusing on too. But my main thought is that lots of people do non-greedy things a lot. Or maybe social things. Maybe like the Chamas are local, whereas a lot of charities, like religious and other kinds of donations, are not local. Well, some of them are local. But anyway, my point is, people do donate.
Right, but we're in a situation right now, at least in this country, where you have an increasingly small number of people who eat up the vast majority of income and grow the most wealth because of that compounding effect. And I guess maybe this has been true historically, but they're not giving away an equally increasing amount of wealth. It's actually the reason why we have taxation, right? People are forced to give that away. So I just want to put that out there as I'd love to see that solved. One idea I've personally had is, can we train each other to be generous? I've made a prototype of a game that if you want to play, just come talk to me, where you have to the only thing you can do in the game is give to each other. And then by doing that, you have like a hyperinflationary coin system where there's just more and more, but we each keep giving each other more. The other thing I wanted to say is that I do think social income needs to go to an individual, not to an organization. And I would just ask that you make a parameter of whatever this design system is, because organizations, that's an amorphous entity, but as you've said, we're trying to deal with the sovereignty of the individual problem. And we have, and then here's the last thing I'll say. The other major problem I see in social income, those who control wealth tend to deal with their own. We tend to go to our own tribes.
Yeah.
One of the big problems we see is that people are giving to each other's organizations. They're giving to each other's friends. But we have entire communities. I mean, here we are in Detroit. I live in Oakland, where we have communities that are really kind of like insulated. I mean, we live in a segregated, at least in this country. I've only spent most of my time here. We're segregated. So my other question would be, if we're doing a giving system, how do I get it to jump that barrier outside of these privileged communities that just keep giving to each other?
Yeah, that's a good one too. We have a lot of good questions.
I'm not sure it's technical or conceptual, but when you say you like decentralized solutions, are democratic decisions decentralized or centralized?
Yeah, I don't like the word decentralized or centralized because it means different things to different people. I couldn't think of a different one on this slide. What I meant here is that I want to experiment with things where the choice of who the money goes to is made only by each of the, different individuals. who are participating and not made by some third party, and also the flow of the money itself should go straight from point A to point B and not go through a third party. That's all I meant by that. I don't know if my answer to your actual question is democratic decision-making, centralized or decentralized. I don't know. Sure, next. How about you, because you're closest to the mic? You all three raised your hands at the same time.
Cool, thanks very much. It's a really interesting idea. Two questions. One is, do you think institutions should give to individuals?
Well, you know about givedirectly.org?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean by the question.
So I guess just like museum or other public works, right, that are maybe more frequented by wealthy folks or only appreciated by a certain amount, like then giving to everyone or giving to a specific targeted group?
Well, I don't have I think my idea is, the social income idea is independent of that question. It's kind of like one of those things that could be decentralizedly decided because each participant could choose for themselves, maybe. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then second piece is, or second question rather, so in terms of thinking about giving to specifically targeted groups, whether it's like the bottom or the 10% of the poorest cell phone owners, et cetera, do you see a way where people can kind of verify themselves or signal that they are poor or in need of something to prevent people from just giving to their wealthy friends?
I don't see a way to do that technically in a decentralized way. The only way to do that is to get people to go sort of on the ground and investigate and become embedded and report back and so on. So it's possible to do that, but outside of the sort of technical layer, right? Like you could imagine if you had social income where everyone is in the habit, there's like a social norm, like in the same way that you tip. Oh, I should have added tipping onto this list of like similar things that lots of people actually do. Or if you tithe or whatever. Also, everyone's in the habit of letting their phone give money in the social income sharing system. And you could imagine you rely on some third party, which is either your friends or a trusted charity like Give Directly or something like that, to tell you who deserving, needy recipients are. That would still be somewhat decentralized because it would be up to you, but you'd be relying on someone else's information. You raised your hand next.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the talk. You know, it's interesting, I'm trying to work on a project like that myself, and the approach that I'm taking to the whole Sybil resistance issue is that it's basically it's a currency that's created just via a smart contract running on top of a blockchain rather than trying to embed it in the infrastructure layer, because I feel like these are more applications rather than...
But how does that solve the Sybil problem?
Yeah, so the way that it works is that it is you basically lock up funds within a contract, and that contract will then give you back a share. And then every time you lock up more funds into the contract, those get distributed to everybody. And then we go to merchants and people that are working. So kind of we're building on top of it like an Uber-type marketplace. And all of the participants in that marketplace only accept that as payment. So in order to pay them and in order to get that service, the money has to go through the contract, which pays everybody else. And the idea is that we don't put any requirements, as in you have to like announce how much of these shares you have. You can create more of them if you want. You can speculate on them if you want. So we really don't opinionate. So that was just the approach that I was taking.
What's the name of that project?
It's called P3C.io. Yeah, I'll give you my card at the end. So I was just interested too because I've been following Zcash and I know that it has an interesting model which is kind of a developer fee that's built into the protocol. And I'm curious, how do you handle Sybil resistance of that? So if it's let's say 100-year project, how do you make sure that that's going to stay good for 100 years?
Okay, so Zcash has a mechanism built into it, which is, now that you mention it, this is totally relevant to this conference. It's a solution to the public goods funding problem. So the public good in question is development of Zcash itself, like new software and new cryptography protocols and all this other stuff. And the way the funding system works is that all holders of Zcash, everyone who owns some, like that previous guy who has a little bit, whether they know it or not, I wonder if that guy knows it, they're effectively funding that development system, which is, I'm one of the chief beneficiaries of that funding because I run this company that develops and upgrades Zcash, and that company gets paid by this funding system. But anyway, the point is it is purely decentralized and it's voluntary, it's opt-in, but all of the holders of Zcash pay into the funding in proportion to the size of their holdings. Does that make sense?
So via like inflation in a sense?
Yeah, it's what they call inflation in cryptocurrency world, which is different from what they call inflation in economics world, so be careful. I would call it issuance, that the blockchain produces new Zcash coin, it issues new Zcash coins, and a portion of the newly issued ones goes to the developers to upgrade it. Does that make sense?
So my question, and kind of like looking into the system, because I'm not too familiar with it, is how do you make sure that, let's say in the future, like 50 years in the future, you've retired, you're living out on a nice beach somewhere, you don't want to deal with cryptography anymore. How do you make sure that the new developers are also getting those funds in order to continue the thing? Like, what's the handoff process for that?
Well, there's these two problems, Sybil versus centralization. And the current system that we use in Zcash avoids the Sybil problem. No one can spoof being a developer and claim that they're helping and claim to be a billion developers and get all of the funding. But it doesn't solve the centralization problem. The current Zcash coin holders are relying on my company and one other organization, which is a nonprofit. It's a foundation that I don't have anything to do with. But there's two, so that's better than one. But it's still just two specific centralized things that are benefiting from the funding and that are supposed to be giving back by improving the public good on everyone's behalf. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Basically, I don't know how to make it long-term, like 50-year, secure against the corruption of centralization.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a difficult problem.
Yeah, well, the reward is scheduled to end, so that will solve the problem of centralization, but then it'll open up the problem of underfunding of public goods.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a huge problem for these decentralized projects, and what I've found is that the personal approach that I take is that, or that I believe is that if people really believe that what you're contributing is good and useful, I think that you can just be a part of it, and then if people don't believe it anymore, then they can just fork it and move to something else, and then just say, oh, well, we don't want to pay you anymore, and then you can sort of go to a different system that way. But that's sort of my own approach. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you.
George, yeah, thanks for doing this talk. I have like a couple of questions. Could I just do QA? Is that cool?
Fine.
Cool. The first question, because I kind of missed it from earlier, what was the third way? I remember that you said pay privately between friends, paying to a charity, and what was the third, like?
Yeah, it was really unclearly explained, but it's pay to a whole bunch of people who you can be sure it's not a Sybil attack. Anybody that you can be sure it's not a Sybil attack is my idea. And that's the one that means the wealth spreads just in all directions over time.
Okay. And the first question, if using like phone proximity is like a civil mitigant, like would we also need like a mesh network to kind of ensure that the phone towers aren't like giving false data?
Oh, that's a neat question. I love that kind of adversarial security analysis. Yeah, well, it would be possible to really make it secure so that even like the cell phone company couldn't civil attack it and get 1 billion shares for themselves. One way you can do that is the near field radio communications on your phone, right? NFC and maybe infrared. I guess they don't have infrared anymore, but there's different kinds of ways. And another way is latency. There's this really neat fact in physics and cryptography that one thing nobody can ever spoof is being closer to you than they are, right? Like my phone and your phone can communicate in like about 10 nanoseconds or so over radio, and the cell phone company can't respond to a 10 nanosecond challenge because the cell phone tower is more than 10 nanoseconds away from here. That's a cool little detail. Totally impractical and weird science fiction.
Okay, thank you. Second question, would this potentially make more sense on like a private stablecoin, like, you know, God forbid, like Facebook's potential stablecoin, or something like that? Just like with like privacy and like, what is it, like price stability kept in mind, like the first guy's question about kind of like the price stability, or it seemed as though it dipped a little bit into the price stability of Zcash, so then it's like tricky to pool this money, and then it's like, oh, you know, this pool's $10,000, and then something happens on the network, and now it's 7,000.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't get it. Like, I don't see why everyone's so excited about stablecoins, but why not do both? We can do it on Zcash and on a stablecoin, and everything else at the same time.
And in the examples that you mentioned earlier, are you familiar with like blessing loom schemes that kind of, they run really similar to this?
What's it called? Blessing loom?
Yeah, so like basically a group of random people, like you see it on like Facebook. It's also kind of like a raffling round or raffling scheme, effectively, but like raffling rounds are a lot shorter term, so there isn't really like a means to kind of like call it and, you know, receive like a corresponding share. But like with both blessing looms, which kind of have this whole like cultural thing, you know, hey, you know.
Excuse me, you're saying loom, L-O-O-M, like
yes.
We're weaving blessings?
Yes.
Sweet.
So like they end up running a lot like Ponzi schemes because partially, not quite it's the same adversarial consideration with like Sybil Sybil resistance, but it's just that the organizer is just running off with the money, and you know the next person says, hey, can I get, you know, $50? I crashed my car, and there's no money. So then, like,
thanks for telling me that. That's another example from my list. It's like Chama's.
Yeah. So like how, I guess like would we, or hypothetically, would you want to like keep the circles small enough so that Ponzi schemes are like not economically feasible because everyone knows each other, and you know you can't.
That's a really great question. You still have the problem of people running off or cheating in the decentralized social income concept, but it's just like 1/20th of the problem. Because in a Chama or a blessing loom or something else where there's one person who's like the organizer on behalf of 20 other people, they can steal all 20 of their money. And with having your phone do it on behalf of everyone, you could have one person who is like not pulling their weight, right? They're like pretending to donate into the pot, but they're not really donating into the pot, and you can't really tell. So you do have to think about, that's a good example of why you can't just do this for like 10 billion people at once, is because you can't tell who's actually doing it and who's not. And then your question was, should you keep it into a small enough circle? I think that's a really good answer. That's how Chamas work, is that you keep it into a small enough circle, and everybody has a stake. Like Chamas are all women from the neighborhood who've lived there their entire life, and they have families, and so there's like a lot of social and economic reasons for them not to cheat. Anyway, that might not be the only way. Keeping it small might not be the only way to prevent cheating. I don't know. Social norms are a really great way to prevent cheating. Religion is a really great way to prevent cheating. We just need to get Judaism and Christianity and Islam to mandate that you run this on your phone, and then that would probably help a lot.
And this seems like similar to like insurance. Like, what are did you kind of like look into kind of like the history of like how insurance kind of like popped up, and like how would, I mean, is there incentive to make this different from insurance, or is it just that like the way that insurance works is just, it works well, it makes sense, and we just need to kind of like distribute it such that like people aren't, or right, yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to those questions. I haven't studied the history of insurance very much at all. I do like the idea of local, decentralized social insurance to help you if you lose your job. I don't know if this could do that, but it's definitely one of the things that it's kind of like.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, thanks for all the ideas. Who was next?
Hi, Zooko. I think the issuance rewards experiment for solving the public goods problem on Zcash is super interesting. And hypothetically, if there was someone who is campaigning to do issuance rewards on another blockchain to solve the public goods problem, would you have any advice?
Yeah, I saw it. Were you you were the one who posted that just like a couple days ago.
Yeah, you're breaking my veil of hypotheticalness, but yes.
So if everyone doesn't know, you know about Ethereum, a cryptocurrency. So Kevin has publicly called for the development and improvement of Ethereum to get funded by issuance rewards, which effectively means transferring value from all Ethereum holders. What was your question? Any advice? I don't know. I mean, you definitely have to communicate to people about the benefits to them, right? The value they're getting, and why you have to persuade them that they're better off by supporting this and getting better funding for Ethereum than the alternative.
Have you found, given that you're about 2 years into funding public goods on Zcash, are people more responsive to like profile pieces on the teams that are being funded, or an economic piece that makes the case that your Zcash is worth more because public goods are funded? You know, what kind of benefits arguments are helpful to different constituencies?
Oh, that's a really great question. I don't think the Zcash team has done a very good job. I don't think I've done a very good job of explaining it, like public communications and persuasion. We set it up because, you know, I'm a technologist. Like you saw with this whole talk about how there's this mechanisms that I could see how these mechanisms might do this and that. Similarly, 5 years ago, actually, we set out to make Zcash, and we came up with this mechanism of public funding of Zcash development, and we basically just included that in the protocol when we launched it, and we were very careful about transparency to make sure everyone knew up front, like we had disclosed it so everyone could find out, and also we put it front and center. We really emphasized everyone needs to know that there's this funding mechanism going on. But we didn't do a good job of advocacy or persuasion, and the result has been the constituent. You asked about how to appeal to different constituencies. So there's an important constituency within the world of cryptocurrencies, which is like cryptocurrency fans. A lot of them are traders who like buying and selling coins to try to make money. A lot of them are enthusiasts or activists or technologists who are really into the technology or the potential use. And they have like a bunch of weird subcultures, as you are well aware. But maybe not everyone is exactly well aware of how weird these subcultures are in cryptocurrency. But there are some of those subcultures who really, really hate the Zcash funding mechanism. They believe it to be corrupt and centralized, and therefore it, in their view, it contradicts and undermines the whole meaning and purpose of the movement because it's centralized and the whole purpose is to be decentralized. and they think it's greedy. They think I am like taking money from other people for my own good. And that's a very, very strongly held belief. They really hate Zcash more than anything for this reason, even though they love everything else about Zcash, like the technology that the public funding is producing. They really love that technology, but they hate the way that it's funded because they think that's evil and wrong. Now that's it's a very vocal, but a pretty small constituency. At the same time, there's this other constituency within cryptocurrency world, which is entrepreneurs and investors, and they're like finance industry people, and they're very sophisticated and learned and whatever. And if I think for the most part, they all love this model because it's a solution to an otherwise unsolved problem of funding public goods. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's a useful data point. Thank you, Zooko.
I think you're next. Hey, we're running out of time. I'm happy to talk about this all day and all night, but presumably we have to stop at some point.
Actually, thanks for bringing this topic of the social income. That's the topic actually that brought me here from Russia. And so just for your question about the mutual insurance, there are some nice projects on car insurance, like the group like self-insure each other. And they create a pool. It's based on Ethereum and kind of they vote on each case and each claim.
What's like a keyword or name for this?
Teambrella, I think.
What umbrella?
Teambrella. Teambrella, yeah.
Oh, I don't understand what the word you're saying.
Teambrella. It's like umbrella. Teambrella. It's like from team and umbrella.
Okay, got it. Team and umbrella put together.
Yes, I just also watching them because it's not so easy because they discuss each claim. It's like it takes like 5 days. But still it's a community process. But my question is or my comment, point is, it looks like the proof of identity, like Sybil resistant, is the hardest problem. Because then you can build on top, like the network, the scalable blockchain consensus. But what about the following? Like, think of what is the more scarce resource, let's say, on Earth? It's our time. And what if we all get together on, let's say, in some point of time, like at 12 p.m., and on some app, like fancy, nice app, and we just try to solve some AI hard Turing test?
I'm familiar with this kind of solution.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. It's a proposed solution for the Sybil attack. And like a good way, a way that I like the idea of it is we're going to do it in person and socially. Like whenever there's a conference and we're all in the same room, we're all going to say, okay, everybody here gets an identity. And this is your identity, meaning that you were here in this room at this moment. And that way, we're pretty sure nobody's going to generate 1 billion of them because we would notice. Now, it's good. It's a good start. Like, we can't obviously do it for all 10 billion people, but we can start.
But it should be online, right? So it should be kind of an online ceremony.
I don't think it's going to work. I think once you try to make it scalable, then it's going to become attackable.
But I mean, this is what we try to solve, actually.
Yes, I agree. I'm glad you're thinking along these lines. I hope you figure it out.
Yeah. Are there any other kind of approach to this, or because we thought about a year about how to protect the proof of identity, and it seems to be so far the only one, which is kind of not really socially scalable, but somehow feasible.
I know of a few, but since we're running out of time, and there was one more person who already raised their hand, did you have something to say? I like that topic, but we're out of time, and there's only one woman who had anything to say so far.
So this is like a completely, unattainable, or this is going to complicate things immensely. But how can we use this to create sort of a gift economy? So instead of like remunerating people with money, it's like you send someone a beer, right? And then you imagine that people that have a lot of money, like they also need things that they can be gifted as well by people that maybe do not have a lot of money, and like sort of transform this into like a truly post-monetary system.
All right, I want to answer that, and you'll see that I'm such a geek and economist at heart with my answer. I think my answer is there's this number which is what percentage of your income you redonate, which is 10% for tithing, and it's 1/40th after your basic needs for zakat. My answer is you just turn that number up higher and higher. Once everyone's wealthier and wealthier and has enough of their other needs met, then they can turn it up to 90%, and they can turn it up to 99%, and then that's my answer. Then it's totally not a good psychological answer. That's a mathematician's, that's my cryptography answers. You turn that number up to 99%. It's totally different from your question, which is how do you shift from numbers to gifts? Yeah, do you want to say something?
I actually wanted to respond to that question. So I run a company called Buns. It's a bartering economy.
Wait, Buns, like B-U-N-S?
B-U-N-Z.
Okay.
Or Z, I guess, for Americans. Yeah, so it is a bartering economy. So there's about 1 million transactions that were completed peer-to-peer that were actually physical goods. And then you encounter the problem of medium of exchange, the classical economics issues associated with the bartering economy. So you end up having the need for a currency at some point as you scale that economy. The question becomes is, how do you distribute that income? And what do you back it with? And so we took the approach of using data-backed money. So the demand for data today is globally is about a $400 billion industry. Looking at attention economics, data, and work completed on networks. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we do. But it is very possible to build bartering economies which foster a community and then introduce currencies as complementary.
Neat. Yeah. Thanks. All right, now technically we're out of time. They're telling me to stop. Thank you all very much for coming. Please keep talking about it.